Podcasting, the final frontier. These are the episodes of a Catch as Catch Can podcast. Its continuing mission to explore strange, nerdy topics, to chat about sports, movies, TV, sci-fi, and so much more. To boldly pod where this nerd has gone before.
Captain's Log, pod date 04/01.20. Welcome to Boldly Pod, the podcast that isn't going to fool you. Not at all. But we're going to toy around with you a little bit. Just a little bit. Now, if you listened to the last podcast, my friend Erin joined me. And during that conversation, she brought up the idea that her husband, Patrick, and I sit down and have a conversation about something we both love, and that's toys. Childhood toys. Toys we loved as kids. And I don't know if she said that because she knew how much we love toys or because we're both immature, but that's something for her to figure out. So Patrick and I did indeed have a fun conversation, and you are about to pay witness to it. So, Scotty, set phasers on stun. Here's my conversation with Patrick as we discuss our favorite childhood toys. So, as most of you know, here on Too Boldly Pod, I'm kind of changing it in 2020 to include my friends in on some of these discussions. And last time you heard Erin on here as we talked about Mystery Science Theater 3000, well, her and her husband came up with a great idea for this episode. We need to sit down and talk about the toys that we loved when we were kids. So Patrick is going to join me now, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite toys we loved as kids. Now, before we get to the list, is there anything you want to talk about, your childhood toy memories?
Yes, I guess mine seem to be pretty sci-fi oriented overall, I would say. Your typical boy born in the 70s growing up through the 80s, but I think I have a few that people might not remember quite as well, so hopefully that'll be a little fun.
That will be, because mine are pretty standard. Everyone's going to remember them, but I wanted to kind of counterbalance everything, so.
Yeah.
So go ahead and shoot us your first one on your list.
Okay, my first one is probably, it's first because it's the earliest, like, super cool toy I played with, but probably also the least recognizable to fans and a lot of people other than those of us who actually had it. There was a toy line called the Micronauts, who were, in my opinion, super cool. But the coolest of all Micronauts was the Force Commander. He was a droid who looked a lot like a Cylon from Battlestar Galactica, but he was white and orange, and his coolest features, he had magnet balls for joints, and everywhere that there's a magnet ball as a joint in his exoskeleton, it came apart and would magnet back in. So that was super cool. His hands shot, and those born of the later generation than we were got most shooting things taken out of their toys because they were dangerous. And his hands not only shot, but they shot across any given room and sometimes across 2 rooms. He also had a missile that shot directly out of the center of his chest and a really cool rocket backpack, but it was more for looks. It didn't actually shoot anything. But I thought he was one of the coolest things that's ever been created.
Well, you had me at Cylon, so that's pretty much where I was sold. So people know I'm a huge original Battlestar Galactica mark. So
yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites. You should, if you aren't looking him up right now, you should look him up later to see exactly what I was describing. But I love that toy, and I played with him for probably 4 years, at least, on a regular basis.
So my first one, and it might not be cool to some, but it was to me because of the genesis around it. Growing up in the 70s, everyone was enthralled with Evel Knievel. And they had this racing bike that had the old plastic strip that you pulled out and set it down and it took off. I forget what that was called, but the zipper strip or whatever.
Yeah, we called it the zip cord.
Yeah, well, there you go. So I wanted that so bad one Christmas, and we opened all the presents, nothing. I was dejected. And then there was one little envelope sitting on the tree, and I got sent around on a household scavenger hunt, and lo and behold, I finally find it. One more package, open it. It was the Evel Knievel bike. I probably played with that thing for years. Was so in love with it, and I don't know why, but it's just one of the most memorable toys I had as a kid.
Yeah, one of the coolest things about that was if you had him not quite in that situated properly when you pulled it, and he'd come off kind of squirrely and like tornado circle and just take off to wherever. I always thought that was pretty fun.
Or in the 70s on the half shag carpet, and it would get and all the everything would. Yeah. All right, so there's my first one. What is your second one?
My second one, being a huge lifelong Star Wars nerd, there had to be something Star Wars related in here for sure. And when they were first coming out, I think because he was angled more towards the youth, I was more of a Luke Skywalker fan. Just a few years down the line, I figured out that Han was much cooler. But being young and my first experience and everything else, Luke was who we were aimed to be enamored with. So my favorite was the X-Wing fighter at the time over the Millennium Falcon. And I loved when those wings would deploy into the battle mode and turn into the X. Being able to do that on my toy I thought was so cool. The drop down landing gear and then pushing down on the R2 situated at the back and having it light the laser light and make the noises of the lasers, it was just as cool as it could get.
Well, I'll use my next one, tack onto that, because you knew we were both going to have Star Wars ones. I went simplistic. I went just the original action figures, and like you, I was enamored with Luke before I fell in love with the dark side. But I had the Luke and the Darth Vader that had the little plastic lightsabers that came up out of the wrist.
Yep.
And I used to just beg my older brother to play with me. And, of course, always made him be Darth Vader, and I was Luke and always won, but that's beside the point. So, any other Star Wars ones that you never had but you always wanted, you kind of wish you would have had?
I think that the one thing that I wanted that I never got to have, and it seems so dumb because it's smaller and simplistic, but I wanted to get the speeder bike that the Scout Troopers rode on Endor. My little brother had one, and it was the coolest thing about it was when there was a little like storage pack on the back of it. So you'd fly that thing around, zoom, zoom, zoom. Well, you could push down on the little storage pack on the back, and the whole thing would blow into pieces. It'd fly into like 4 different pieces, like you had blown up. And you'd have to piece the whole thing back together and click the spring to attach it back together. And I always wanted that. I was supposed that my brother had it, and I didn't.
I love that because I got the land speeder, but one of the wheels, quote wheels, that made it float was busted. So it never worked. And I begged and begged and begged my mom to exchange it, and she never did. Damn her.
Oh, no.
So those are our partial. I also always wanted the Death Star toy collector where you'd set your toys in it.
Yes.
Case or whatever it was.
Really cool. I had the Darth Vader head that I actually had 2 of them that held the figures.
We're dorks.
Yep.
And damn proud of it.
Oh, of course. Most of that stuff, I still technically own most of it, but unfortunately it's 1,700 miles away from me back in Idaho.
Collecting dust like all my stuff is doing in a basement somewhere.
Yeah, mine's all in my dad's garage.
So, that just reminded me of something else I'll throw at you later. Anyways, what's number 3 on your list?
My number 3 is a particular G.I. Joe action figure. Another big line from our kind of generation, but I got into it after the bigger toys had their run, and it became the 3¼ inch size figures to compete with our Star Wars action figures. And there was a particular Cobra, I don't even know what his rank was or anything, but a guy named Zartan came with a little vehicle called the Chameleon Sled, and both he and his Chameleon Sled changed colors in the sunlight. So that was the first super cool thing about it. But then the other cool yet kind of creepy thing was he had a second face that he carried around in his backpack. He had a backpack and it had only one purpose, and it was to carry his second face around. Well, when you put his second face on him, he looked exactly like Sean Connery in Zardos. But it was unbelievable. So, but he was awesome.
I totally remember that. I don't remember the Sean Connery part, but I do remember the face. Sorry. I like the comparison, though. That is awesome.
Yeah. And it was always creepy for some reason, being able to look, because it wasn't like a robot face or a ninja mask like the other ones had. It was another human face, complete with facial hair. So that's what made it extra weird.
That's going to make my next one sound extremely boring, but I wanted to do it because everybody in the early 80s had to have this game. And I mean, girls, boys, even older people, younger people. And that was the Rubik's Cube.
Indeed.
Everybody, either that, Rubik's Cube, or whatever that snake thing was called. I don't even remember what it was called, but...
Yeah, which was also made by the Rubik's people, I believe.
But my question to you is, did you ever solve the Rubik's Cube?
Here's confession time. I made it appear as I could solve it on numerous occasions, because I figured out early on that if you tilted one of the 3 wedges just enough, you could pop out one of the corner pieces, which would release all but 6 of the block, and then you could repiece it together in the proper order.
See, to me,
that's how I could solve it.
That's the best way to solve it. That's the most ingenious way to solve it. Who the hell needs to use all that brain power?
Yeah, for sure. And so that's my confession right now, is that I could not actually solve it the way you were supposed to.
You're not alone, my friend, because I did that, and I also talked about this with our mutual friend Karen, and which is weird to call her that, but anyways.
Yeah.
The first thing she said to me is, I never solved it without taking it apart and putting it back together.
Awesome.
So we're not alone. So
yeah, well, her and I used to call ourselves the Wonder Twins, so I guess that's one more Wonder Twin thing about the two of us, is we solve the Rubik's Cube the same way.
Rubik's Cube, damn you. So what's number 4 on your list?
Number 4 is a Transformer. I had to get a Transformer in there because for a couple years they were probably my favorite of all toys. And to me, the coolest one for many, many reasons was Soundwave. Being into music in general, I love the fact that his non-robotic form was a micro cassette recorder. Turned into a really cool looking robot, which is always important with those. But then whoever designed Soundwave is a toy genius, because they figured out that they could make cassettes the size to go into Soundwave cassette recorder slot. But when they came out, they were also little transformable robots. They turned from the tape into either a robot or a robotic animal that were, as far as the cartoon would go on to explain, they were like his spies that would go out and do his bidding. I just thought the fact that his cassettes were also transformable toys, that it was like getting 5 toys in one when you got Soundwave, because you got him in 4 tapes, and it was just, he was super cool.
See, that's what's cool about being a boy, because girls got like Teddy Ruxpin with a cassette you could put in his chest, and we got stuff that we could just, it never ended.
Yeah.
I think it was.
We definitely got the better end of each toy design marketed towards us. There's no doubt.
And if there's any women listening, if I got Teddy Ruxpin wrong, forgive me. I have no idea.
my best friends when I was a little kid. In fact, I'm still friends with Brandy, aka Michelle, on Facebook, and she will probably be listening to this. But she was also a huge Star Wars collector, as myself, but she also was into her strawberry shortcakes. So when I would go to her house, she would make me play strawberry shortcake with her before we were allowed to play Star Wars, which is what I really wanted to play with her. So that's how she manipulated me to be able to play dolls with her as well.
All right, so let me ask you this. You just mentioned the strawberry shortcakes. Does that instantly bring up that smell that they had?
It does, especially the little one, lemon meringue. I still can smell the lemon meringue doll anytime I try to think about it.
Anyways.
I know, they were awful.
So my next one is, and I'm saying the general name of the object, and it's Stretch Armstrong, because I didn't have Stretch Armstrong. Yeah.
He almost made my list.
I had Stretch Incredible Hulk.
Oh, so cool.
It was very cool, and I can attest to what happens when one of those things springs a leak. It would be totally not a toy that would be made and allowed for kids these days.
No. Quite toxic, if I remember. My actual Stretch Armstrong busted an arm at one point.
That's exactly what happened to my Incredible Hulk, and my mom tried to put it in the freezer to freeze it back together, and it was never the same after that.
Yeah.
I do miss that thing, though. It was fun to play with for, I don't know, probably 3 weeks before it busted.
Yeah.
And your fifth choice.
My fifth one, I hope you don't consider this cheating, because we did go with the basis of specific toys out of the lines or whatever. But there's a very particular reason that I chose this the way that I did. My number 5 is He-Man figures just in general. I had several of them. And the reason I had to go this way is because for me, they had 2 complete lives. they were my He-Man figures at first when I first got them, and loads of play with them and battling each other and everything else. But after a little bit of time, I don't remember what, maybe a year and a half or so, I was less into that, but I got big time into WWF wrestling. And my mom would not buy me the figures, but I came across a ring somehow. I think an aunt or uncle gave me the wrestling ring. So my He-Man figures then became my WWF wrestlers for the next while.
Well, hey.
And so they had, as a toy line, they had 2 complete lives with me. So it made them pretty important in my growing up for both the dual reasons.
Okay, so you had your He-Man sitting there going, all right, brother, what are you going to do?
Yep, absolutely. He-Man was Paul Orndorff who my He-Man was.
That's awesome. My fit,
and I believe.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, my man at arms was my Macho Man Randy Savage.
And Skeletor was what? Roddy Piper?
Skeletor, yes, Skeletor actually was my Roddy Piper.
Could you imagine Piper's voice on Skeletor in a movie and not Frank Langella?
Yeah.
So my fifth one, we're both sports fans, and when I was late single digits, just before teens, is really when I exploded loving sports. And this kind of helped me out a little bit, and it was the old handheld Coleco sports games. Basketball, or Mattel had some too. The football games, the basketball games. Everybody I know in school had those, and if you didn't, you were a dork. And
yep.
The Mattel football one was always my favorite because it was the only one that went side to side and not up and down on the screen, and I just loved that for whatever reason.
What was that? Is that the one? It was the little red flashing light that signified that was you, and you would go side to side and then rush it as fast up the middle as you could once you got a hole?
Yes, it was. And then if you passed the ball, it was just a blink and dash.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent so many hours of my life on that.
Yeah, I imagine after those things kind of fell out of favor, the 9-volt battery industry probably went right in the tubes.
Oh, without a doubt.
Now, I had mentioned I was going to throw a surprise one on you, which you kind of got a hint about, but you and I are Gen Xers, so we are in the genesis of the video game era.
Yes.
So when exactly and what exactly was your first video game player?
Okay, so I had all my friends were, I guess they weren't cooler than me. All my friends had cooler parents than I did. So they all ended up with the Atari and the Intellivisions and ColecoVisions, and so I would have to go to their house to play any of those things. So my actual first system that I got to own was the original NES system. And when it came out that first year, heading into that first Christmas, which would have been the Christmas leading up to it was my freshman year, I believe, actually. So I was even getting a little bit older. But I begged and begged and begged my parents and said that they would not have to buy me anything else for an entire year if they got that for me. And so, like you, with your other gift thing, I went through the entire opening of presents and got to the end and nothing had happened. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, what's that over there? And they pointed at the box in the corner, and I was so excited. But then it turned out when I saw that it was addressed to my brother, my younger brother, and I had that 14-year-old angst where I was actually briefly disappointed that it wasn't just for me.
and you couldn't take the duck hunt gun and shoot him with it.
Yes, exactly. And that's what ours came with. It had the double cut cartridge with the Mario Brothers and the Duck Hunt. And that was actually the only cartridge we had for probably at least the first 9 months we owned the system.
And then you got Tecmo Bowl and everything changed.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Let me guess, you were the Raiders because nobody could tackle Bo Jackson.
Yes, being a Cowboys fan, I would always try to play as the Cowboys because, in my opinion, it's like Tony Dorsett is better than Bo Jackson. Dang it, I am going to be the Cowboys. But luckily, I'm smart enough, and I did eventually figure out if I actually wanted to win, I had to be the Raiders.
Well, my first one was actually Atari, but I got it secondhand, so I had to wait a while before I got it. And I just remember sitting, well, as long as I could before I got sent to bed, but man, I wasn't allowed to have it in my room. It had to be in the living room TV, so that's how my mother used to, okay, that's enough.
Yeah. I was just going to say, my parents, they dealt with that by not ever letting me have an actual TV in my room. So they were able to just send me to my room or to bed, and they're like, now your time is done.
Well, I had a TV, but it was like a 10-inch black and white one, which I think came out of my dad's hunting camper or something. So it probably wouldn't have been any good. Now, I asked our friends on social media if they had any games that they thought were their favorites, and I'm sure you read them, but I'm still going to read them anyways. Our friend Kate said her favorite toy when I was a kid were the Light Bright and the Click Clacks. At least you can still get the Click Clacks. I don't even know what Click Clacks are, do you?
Yes, I believe that they were, if I am recalling this right, they had a handle, and then at the end of the handle, there were two balls that dangled from the end, and you would try to swing them around so they would click each other and knock the other one around. And if you got the timing right, it would go click, 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 and swing around and around and around, and you could keep it going. But that's what I believe that those were.
Our friend Kelly brought up the Little People, which I don't remember the Little People, but I probably had them, and I know I, at one point, for whatever reason, had a Little People farm in my basement. I don't even know why it's there, because I don't have any kids. My friend Paul brought up, he loved the Shogun Godzilla. Said he took it. He took it everywhere with him. He said, of course, Millennium Falcon and G.I. Joes are some of his most treasured, and he's a big horror fan. So he also brought up the Masters of the Universe figures and the classic monsters of yore. But Kate and my sister brought up something else that we all loved as kids growing up, and that was board games.
Yes.
Were there any board games that you loved or treasured as a kid?
The one I most fell in love with was Monopoly. I went through a phase where I would play Monopoly every chance I got with anyone who was willing to sit down and play. I just wanted to always play Monopoly all the time. And I actually, surprisingly, because I am a hugely competitive person, I played many sports growing up, everything else. But for some reason with Monopoly, it was just enough for me to have people playing. I was not like the ruthless Monopoly guy. Yes, I tried to win, but I wouldn't get irritated if I didn't. I was just happy that someone was sitting there playing Monopoly with me so I could play.
No, were there any games that maybe people don't remember that you had or liked, or maybe you hated?
Well, I really liked one called Stratego. I know that I played it a lot in middle grade school, so probably like 4th, 5th grade. And the hilarious thing is that at this point, if you were to set a Stratego game in front of me, I would have no clue as to where to begin. Like, I don't remember anything about how you play it. I barely remember the little plastic stand-up pieces that go with it, but I do remember that I loved that game. And I do not know how popular it was because no one ever wanted to play it with me.
It's like Risk. I had Risk and nobody ever wanted to play it with me, and I used to love that game.
Yeah.
My sister brought up one that she always, to this day, I don't even know why she loved it so much. It was called Stop Thief. And it was like a clue type game with a handheld electronic thing.
Yes, I do remember that.
And I don't even, it might still be in my mom's closet. I'll have to look when I go there. But I should have asked her to explain more what it was about that song, that game that she loved so much. But Risk, I just keep going back to Risk as my computer just, sorry.
I will tell you a game that I used to love that I didn't even grow to hate. I hated it based on one particular day and moment. My lovely wife, Erin, that we all love so much, soon after I moved to Iowa to be with her, we played Uno. And she proceeded to literally beat me 500. She got the 500 points to 1. I somehow managed 1 entire point for an entire session of Uno. And I have never been so deflated in my life over anything, and I've never played Uno since.
Well, the old coach in me wants to give you the positive of that story.
Okay.
And it wasn't that you moved to be with Aaron. That's a positive in and of itself. But the positive was you didn't get shut out. You got 1 point.
Yes. But for some reason, and I found it almost stung more, that single point. And I don't know why. I can't explain that. But for some reason, the 1 point almost stung more.
Did you get your revenge on her in later games, or haven't you sat back down at the Uno table since?
No, I have actually never played Uno since. And Aaron's really good at basically most everything. So things we do play together, more than not, I'm going to lose. And I know that going in. And I've got no issues with losing to my wife or anyone else. But that day and that game, it's just, it's that point of that there's a little bit of broken pride when you take a beating that severe.
It's like tanking in sports.
Yes, but it was like tanking without trying to.
What were there any? I know you talked about Masters of the Universe and this, but one last one that somebody suggested that I remember was, were there any TV shows that made you want to get toys from the TV show? Because somebody had mentioned the $6 Million Man.
Yes, actually those were good toys, and the same general line of things a little bit later, but a show that I consider kind of similar in some ways, even though it didn't have the mechanical aspect. I saw early episodes of The Fall Guy, and I knew that they had put out a Fall Guy toy line, and I'm like, those would be really cool. This show is cool. I want Fall Guy toys. And so my mom got me a Fall Guy truck, complete with the main figure, whatever.
The Fall Guy.
And yes, and all I remember is them being about the most poorly constructed toys I had ever owned. I think the front axle fell off within like 8 minutes. And I even believe, I think like one of his legs fell off like the very first time I took it out of the box too. And I'm like, this is just complete junk. And I think I quit watching the show even because of it.
So maybe the Fall Guy toys were cast off $6 Million Man toys that didn't sell, and they just put a new outfit on them and repackaged them since it was the same guy.
Yeah, I think they absolutely may have used, at the very least, may have used the same mold and then just put new clothes on it.
Well, do you have any last parting words that you want to talk about childhood toys and whatnot that we didn't cover?
No, I think the overall gist is that I believe that we were lucky to grow up when we did, because even though things are more technical now, which is cool, because I love my electronics, I worked IT, I love all that kind of stuff, but I believe that we grew up in the golden age of toys. I don't think there ever was and probably ever will be a better overall time frame for just the magnitude of possible toy lines and the coolness of seemingly all the major ones at the same time. We did not get gypped growing up on what we had available to play with.
No argument here. And I totally concur with the golden age of toys, because I'm sure generations before us did this, but not so much after us. And it was like when, well, at least for me, when my mother got the JCPenney or the Sears or whatever catalog, Christmas catalog, I immediately went to the back where the toy section was and just started mapping out what I wanted.
Absolutely.
I mean...
Absolutely. I remember taking the catalog and a pen and sitting there laying on the floor in my room with the radio on and circling all the things I hoped that I was going to end up with.
And then he had to go back through and edit it and like, nope, they're not going to get me that. Nope, they're not going to get me that.
Yep, exactly.
It's like our early days of making out a budget. He's like, nope, nope. Then you get down to a few things. You're like, yeah, there we go. And that
try to narrow it down to the ones that you're like, well, if I just ask for these ones, maybe I can have a legit shot.
Exactly. And that was your first indoctrination to ecstasy, is Christmas morning when you opened up that thing you really wanted.
Yes. And I will say that I was also really, really lucky in that case, that growing up we never had a whole lot. I know my parents made a ton of sacrifices for multiple things, and I didn't realize how much it was at the time, but looking back now, without fail, every single Christmas morning, I was going to have at least one of those things that I really, really, truly wanted was going to be waiting for me wrapped up under the tree.
I totally agree with that sentiment, because you don't grow to appreciate their sacrifices until you get older. And how can we thank them? I mean,
you never can. And you try and you never can. And I remember even just a few years back, apologizing to my dad for all the things I did growing up, being young, as far as getting into things that were his and possibly losing, destroying whatever, because I was playing with his things and realizing later that he didn't actually have a lot and he didn't get to go out and buy things he wanted. So anything of his that I did break or lose or anything else, I'm like, that was really a big deal. And I felt bad when I had that realization later.
So kids, if you're out there listening, do something nice for your parents.
Yes.
Take them out for a taco. All right, well, you're going to join me again at a future date whenever sports starts back up. And
without a doubt.
And I've been told, and I believe it, that you are some kind of a sports knowledge maven.
I always get made fun of because I know almost as much stuff about sports that happened before I was born as the stuff that I've lived through watching.
That's a good thing, though.
Yep.
All right, well, any closing thoughts before we wrap shop on this fun little podcast?
No, I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me. I was nervous coming in, but there was nothing to be nervous about.
There's never anything to be nervous about on this podcast. If anyone's nervous, it's me. Well, thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. You will be back on here again at another date, and this was a fun conversation.
It was a lot of fun.
I just want to thank Patrick for joining me for this fun conversation about childhood toys, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you have any thoughts about the topics discussed on today's podcast, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at TooBoldlyPod. And until next time, may you live long and prosper.
WLLP Spock Rock Radio.